I'm Harry, and I'm about to turn paper sideways. You're listening to Turn Paper Sideways, the podcast where we talk about cardboard and rotating it 90 degrees. We talk about all things Magic the Gathering, from current affairs to our favourite format, Commander. And in today's show, something a little bit different. You might notice that we're missing a voice and that Tim isn't with me, and that's because we recorded a whole podcast yesterday, and unfortunately in saving, the audio was corrupted or something, it went kaput, and we don't actually have the audio for yesterday's episode, and I'm really sad about that because it was going to be a really good one. We talked about our favourite cards from M19 and it was really good, so I'm really sorry that we can't bring you that. I'm really sorry that it's just me this week, but I'm going to do my best. It might be a slightly shorter episode, but I think I've got something which is going to be fun nonetheless. So if you want to find us on social media, you can find us on Twitter at TPSMTG. You could email us at turnpapersideways@gmail.com. You can find us on YouTube now. Just search Turn Paper Sideways there, and all of our future episodes will be there. Looking forward to branching out into new forms of content, possibly with video footage of stuff in the future. At the moment, the podcast episodes are basically audio only, but if that's how you like to listen to your podcast, you can now get them there on YouTube, and that's fantastic. And if you're interested in supporting the podcast, there are a couple of ways you can do it. So you could go to iTunes and give us a 5-star review. This helps to bump us up the charts and make the podcast more visible for new listeners to find us. And you could also go to patreon.com/turnpapersideways. You could donate as little as $1 an episode to really help out the podcast. So we've got server costs and things that we need to pay for. I've just bought a new microphone, which is what I'm recording into now, which hopefully is why the audio quality is a little bit better. And that was all bought with Patreon money. And so we are really grateful to our patrons for helping us get to that point. So let's get into the news. First bit of news this week is some bannings in Legacy, which doesn't really affect us as Commander players. Deathrite Shaman and Gitaxian Probe have been banned. Gitaxian Probe is one of the Phyrexian spells, and so it's no surprise that that's been banned because it's banned in basically everything else. Phyrexian mana is a pretty broken mechanic, and so Gitaxian Probe, I'm not surprised that's been banned. But Deathrite Shaman, this is a card which has oppressed a lot of Legacy decks. I don't really know about Legacy, but what I do know is that Deathrite Shaman is sort of the bogeyman of the format, and so I think it's probably a good thing. But what it is good for is that there will hopefully be more copies available. This is a fantastic card in EDH, and so I'm really hoping to see the price of this drop just a little bit so that it's more available for Commander players, because I think this is a must include in any green-black deck. It's underplayed for sure, and I've seen it do some real work. If you get it down on turn 1, it's a card which is probably unlikely to be removed in Commander, and it will do some seriously good things across the course of the game. Also this week, Signature Spellbook Jace has been released. We haven't actually had a chance to talk about this on the podcast. This is a supplemental product which includes 8 cards, all blue, all sort of signifying Jace's characteristic spells. So things like Brainstorm and Counterspell and Mystical Tutor. And they're all printed with this new border, and they look gorgeous. One random card from the pack will be a foil, and so if you're into blinging your decks out, this might be something that's worth picking up. I really do think that these look gorgeous, and I'm looking forward to the other Planeswalkers. I hope that they do continue with these. Jace's spells are not necessarily my favourite things to be playing in Commander. They're definitely the sort of thing that Tim likes. He likes counter spells, instants and sorceries, and so this pack is great for him. But for me, I'm hoping for something good along the Garruk or Nissa lines. Big green creatures and land and ramping spells and things like that. Looking forward to seeing what this sort of product holds in the future, and it's quite an interesting space. I think that this sort of supplemental product, there's nothing wrong with having more cards like this. For casual players who might not be too interested in it, it's not doing anything to their market, not hindering them in any way, but for some people it might be quite interesting, so I think that's quite good. But other than that, not a huge amount of news. Obviously, there's the M19 spoilers, which we would love to talk about, but we can't without Tim, of course. So let's get into the main topic after this ad.
Let me ask you a question. Have you been living the Tier 2 life to the fullest?
Welcome to Fishin', a podcast where we discuss a deck with pun potential that's off the scales.
From deck techs to sideboard guides to gameplay videos and in-depth Dirk Diggler speculation, there is guaranteed to be something for you.
So look for Fishin', a Merfolk podcast wherever you find your podcasts, and at Fishin'MTG on all the social media sites. We'll see you on the net.
Alright, so the main topic this week has had to change, like I say. I wanted to be talking about all of the good stuff from M19, of which there is a lot, but instead I'm going to talk about one card in particular, and that is Vaevictus Asmadi the Dire. This is one of the legendary creatures from M19, and I'm super excited about it. It's a Elder Dragon, so we're seeing the return of Elder Dragons in this set. This is where our format started, and so it's quite exciting to be coming back to this. And there are some really cool things with these creatures to build around. So I've picked this one. This is my favourite of them. Vaevictus Asmadi the Dire costs 3 black, red, green for a 6/6 flying legendary Elder Dragon. And whenever Vaevictus Asmadi the Dire attacks, for each player, choose target permanent that player controls. Those players sacrifice those permanents. Each player who sacrificed a permanent this way reveals the top card of their library and then puts it onto the battlefield if it's a permanent card. So I see this a little bit like Prosh's chaotic brother, and I'd like to build a bit of a token deck around this commander. So the plan would be that you get Vaevictus Asmadi down before turn 6 so that you can start attacking. You're going to be able to keep your opponent's biggest threats off the board by making them sacrifice them and replace them with hopefully something worse. Ideally, your opponents aren't going to have their decks built around this kind of effect, and so they're not going to be decks full of permanents, and hopefully you're going to hit some instants and sorceries on the top of their library, and so they get less value off this. You, however, are going to have a deck which generates tokens and has loads of permanents which are better, obviously, than tokens. And so you're going to choose a sapling token or a plant token or something for yourself to sacrifice, and then you can go to the top of your library and find another permanent to replace it with. So we need some token generators. I'm thinking things like Avenger of Zendikar. This is a 7 mana creature which when it enters the battlefield it creates plant tokens based on how many lands you control. I'm thinking creatures like Mycoloth, which is a 5 mana 4/4 fungus with Devour 2. So when this creature enters the battlefield you may sacrifice any number of creatures and put twice that many 1/1 counters on Mycoloth. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you create 1/1 saplings for each 1/1 counter on Mycoloth. And so this is going to generate you loads of creature tokens. You could also have creatures like Endrick Sar, which says you create a number of 1/1 Thrall tokens equal to the CMC of each creature card you cast. So that's going to get you lots more tokens. And so you're going to have a nice little token army in order to sacrifice them and get better things. But we're not going to stop there. We're going to have some sacrifice synergies as well. And so things like Smothering Abomination, which is a flying Eldrazi creature for 4 mana, which says at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature, and whenever you sacrifice a creature, draw a card. So at the very minimum, this is going to trigger on your upkeep, and you're going to sacrifice one of your tokens to draw a card, but it's also going to trigger when you attack. And so you're going to get a lot of value from those sacrificing triggers from Vaevictus Asmadi and other things going on. And so you're going to be drawing a lot of cards, churning through your deck, getting to more value than your opponents can. We also want things like Dictate of Erebos. So this says whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. It's an enchantment for 5 mana. And so when you sacrifice your creature off Vaevictus's trigger, everyone's going to have to sacrifice an extra thing. So you're taking out twice as many of their permanents, which is great. And at the top end of the curve, this is an expensive card, but I think it's worth it. For 12 mana, It That Betrays. It's an 11/11 Eldrazi with Annihilator 2, which is pretty incredible on its own. But it also says whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent, put that card onto the battlefield under your control. This could be nuts. So whenever Vaevictus attacks, you're going to choose the creature on their board that you want to take control of. They're going to sacrifice it and it's going to come back under your control. That's amazing. That is a very quick way to win a game, in my opinion. Other things I'm thinking we could do with this deck are make sure that we've got plenty of enter the battlefield removal, things like Acidic Slime or Shriekmaw. So Acidic Slime is a 5-mana 2/2 with Death Touch, and when it enters the battlefield, destroy target artifact, enchantment or land. If you sacrifice a token creature to Vaevictus and you turn an Acidic Slime off the top of the deck, you're going to get to destroy the next worst thing on an opponent's board and gain value that way. Equally with Shriekmaw, when it enters the battlefield, you destroy a non-black creature, and so this is going to do a lot of work. We want to make sure that we're getting value off every attack, and destroying creatures and other permanents is a good way to do it. We're not always going to have a whole army of tokens that we can get rid of, so we're also going to need quite a lot of recursion, and so I'm thinking that we could have creatures like Merrin. So Merrin is a powerful deck in her own right, and she says that whenever another creature you control dies, you get an experience counter, and at the beginning of your end step, you choose a creature card in your graveyard, and if its CMC is less than the number of experience counters you have, it goes straight back to the battlefield, otherwise it goes to your hand. This means that with recursion like this and things like Eternal Witness and other creatures which return cards to your hand, you're going to be able to sacrifice your non-token permanents and still get value off them. I think that Vaevictus is probably going to get destroyed a lot of the time. He's going to draw some hate if you're churning through your opponent's decks and finding worse things than they've cast. And so I think we probably want some sacrifice outlets in there as well to make sure that we can still get our sacrifice synergies going. So we're going to want things like Viscera, which is a 1-mana 1/1, which says sacrifice a creature to scry one. We're going to want things like Goblin Bombardment, so we can throw our creatures at our opponents and deal them some damage. But I think we'll also want something like Warstorm Surge, so that when your creatures enter the battlefield, you can deal damage to your opponents equal to their power. There is also one card from M19 that I want to highlight. It is in my list of top 5, so I'm cheating a little bit here, but I think it goes really well in this deck, and that is Poison Tip Archer. It's 2 black and a green for a 2/3 elf archer. It's got Reach and Death Touch, which are both amazing stats. It makes it a really good blocker, but it also says whenever another creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life. So whenever you're choosing your opponent's creatures and your creatures to be sacrificed to Vaevictus Asmadi, you're going to get some value there by dealing your opponent's damage, and it's not going to be long before that damage racks up quite significantly, and hopefully you'll be able to use that to close out the game. This is quite similar to Blood Artist or Zulaport Cutthroat, but the thing I really like is that it's whenever any creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life. Instead of Blood Artist, whenever any creature dies, target opponent loses 1 life. Or Zulaport Cutthroat, whenever one of your creatures dies, each opponent. So it's the best of both worlds there. Fantastic. That is definitely one of my favourite cards from M19. So this is quite a fun looking deck, I think. This commander could be quite chaotic. I think it's probably quite a good deck to build 75%. I don't think it's going to draw a huge amount of hate. It's quite janky. It's not going to work every time. It's slightly chaotic. So I know there are a lot of players that like that sort of uncertainty with their games. And I think that this could bring a lot of fun to the table. We will probably talk about this a lot more. And I know that Tim's got a good deck idea around one of the other Elder Dragons as well. So that's it. That's my take on Vaevictus Asmadi. Let me know what you think. You can let me know on Twitter at TPSMTG, or send me an email to turnpapersideways@gmail.com. Also, go and find us on YouTube, like and subscribe. We really want to grow that platform as well. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you with Tim next time. Cheerio.